Hello and welcome to Chatbot on Robot Republic with me, Josh or Riku. Joining me today, we have a very special guest because I am here with Kev from Coke and Code. Hello, Kev.
Hey Josh, how you doing?
I'm good, thanks. How are you?
Busy, but yeah, excited to talk to people.
I was going to say understandable with the project you're working on, because you are currently working. Well, tell us about Tales of Yore because it is a really exciting project and it is really cool.
So Tales of Yore is it's a multiplayer online RPG. I don't say massively just yet, but hopefully one day. It's very much a throwback to the sort of pixel art games of the past. And been going about 8 months now, and we're starting to get some player base and some community going. So it's pretty exciting.
It is. I've kind of been dipping in and out of it and stuff in preparation for the interview, and it is really like you say, it's like it is reminiscent of those pixel art games of old. It is really just stylistically gorgeous. So kind of first major question really is where did the inspiration for this game kind of come from, really?
Yeah, it's a bit of a long story. When I was at university quite a few years ago, yeah, there were these things called MUDs around. I played a lot of sort of tabletop games when I was a kid, your Hero Quest, your Warhammer, that sort of thing. The MUDs came along, and then I've always wanted to write something in that vein, but with some graphics. Ultima Online was a big thing for me. And then Dark Age of Camelot and EverQuest and that sort of thing. So yeah, it's all sort of come together. I've always said that I would never attempt to write a multiplayer online game, but here we are.
I mean, to be fair, a lot of people say that and then it just happens. And then you sit there and go, what have I done to myself?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It sort of feels that way, yeah.
Yeah. But it is absolutely brilliant. And, it's a pixel art game as well. Kind of how did you land on that pixel art style? Was that kind of like, was it kind of a reminiscent of these beautiful pixel art games that we had kind of, 20, 30 years ago?
So I've always been a big fan of pixel art. Not so much back in the old days when I used to play on my Amiga and my Atari ST, but sort of the modern pixel art is incredible. And I spent a long time trying to teach myself how to be a pixel artist. Being an indie game developer, you don't really have a great deal of time to be doing everything. You've got to try and pick your battles. So the art style that's in it is actually an asset pack called Mini Fantasy, which you can find on itch if you want to have a look at it. Krishna, the guy that makes it, is fantastic and is producing new content all the time. And so, yeah, I've used it as a base and then sort of built on top, but it's saved me an awful lot of time. So
yeah, working out well. Absolutely. I mean, just the scale, even with like, smaller indie projects and stuff, the time that's involved in creating assets and stuff can be so time consuming. Like you say, indie developers, you guys tend to be juggling indie development with other jobs as well. So it's, if you can streamline that process, it must make things, I say, slightly less complex. I mean that in the most broadest and vaguest manner possible.
Yeah, I think the thing that people don't always recognize is that as a developer, you can build your software quite quickly. I've been building software a long time, so building code, not a big deal for me. But as an indie developer, you've got to deal with the art, the music, but then you've got to deal with the community, the social, the marketing, even the finance side at times. So, there's a lot to deal with. So picking the bit that you're good at and focusing on that is the way to go, I think.
Yeah, definitely. And, people that watch this do tend to be people that are thinking about moving into the games industry or are students as well. So that's amazing advice for them. If you're watching the students, please do let us know in the comments what you think of Kev's advice, because I think it's brilliant. But that's just my sixpenneth worth. So kind of moving on then. It takes place, so Tales of Yore takes place in a fantasy kingdom. How did you kind of settle on the kind of setting in terms of like this kind of the fantasy elements and the kind of the word is just gone because I'm that professional, and the kind of the time period aesthetics and stuff as well, because it comes across really well in the game.
So like I mentioned, I mean, I played a lot of tabletop games when I was sort of a wee lad, 11, 12, playing things like Hero Quest and Warhammer, and obviously Lord of the Rings and the fantasy genre generally is a big influence on me. But actually, that's about 10 years ago now. It's just over 10 years. I wrote a game called Legends of Yore, which got quite a bit of following. People seem to like it, which is always the thing that I look for. And that built the world called Yore. And so when I went to write my new one 10 years later, and haven't done anything really since the last one, going back to the same world really made me feel comfortable and at home. So that's why I focused there. I love the fantasy setting generally. I love the richness, what you can do with it. Obviously, the other option was to go sci-fi, but I didn't really feel like I could meet the expectations there. So.
And like you say, to be fair, with a fantasy world, there's so much you can do with it. You know, kind of, you mentioned, you know, kind of like Warhammer and Lord of the Rings there, and you know, those are kind of like what I always kind of think of as the kind of like big kind of pinnacles of fantasy genre in very different ways. And it is, I mean, you know, kind of playing through the game and stuff, and you know, just the interactions I've had with some of the NPCs and the world building and stuff is just really lovely. And I've got this, it's just gorgeous what you've done with it. So obviously in the development, you've obviously mentioned that you developed Legends of Yore about 10 years ago, and going back to that was a nice comfort zone and stuff. So kind of how important was the narrative and the kind of all the work you've done in the world building in terms of a development process for Tales of Yore?
Yeah, so I mean, it's formed everything. So when I wrote Legends, I didn't have any ideas. I just made stuff up and built things as I went along. But as I built it and the community got involved, it sort of got its own life. There's a lore to Legends. There's a whole bunch of people that know what the world is like. In fact, there are people that know the world better than I do. So coming to Tales, having that sort of narrative, having that level of detail was really important. And if you look throughout Tales, you'll find things like there's books all over the place. All those books, again, that's kind of harking back to Richard Garriott and the Ultima series. But having loads of books around that sort of describe other bits of the world that you haven't seen yet and future plans, that's really working well for players. And I think it adds a lot to the world to make people believe that they're in the world, especially when you're working in pixel and the visuals don't immediately absorb you. The sort of lore does.
Yeah, I mean, that's something that I found when I've been kind of playing it and stuff, is actually that there is a real richness to the lore, and it was really immersive when I was playing through it. Like, you know, even like the little pixel character creator at the start and stuff, creating your own character, which was really cool, and then going in and kind of just interacting with these NPCs and reading signs and reading books and stuff and finding more out about this world. I was engrossed, and I was like, this world is fascinating.
I joke with some colleagues actually that I mean, I've always loved creative writing, but I've never had time to write a whole book. But everything about Tales is designed to be really sort of small and piecemeal, so that you can just jump in and jump out whenever you feel like it. Which means all of the books are like mini novels, but they're written in 3 pages, so the text has to be really carefully written to portray the right stuff. So yeah, it's been really enjoyable from that point of view.
And that's fantastic. And that, to be fair, that's why people, especially indie developers, make games, because they're fun. Ultimately, we do this because it's fun.
It's strategy, definitely.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, thinking then, kind of like building on from that, was your intention at the start of Tales to make a multiplayer online RPG? Like, was that kind of the intention, or what? That was the intention off the bat. I've done Legends, I've done an RPG. I now want to do an online version, an online game set in that world.
Well, it was kind of a weird scenario actually. Like I said, I built Legends about 10 years ago, and then my day job got very, very busy. I spent a lot of years working really, really hard and not doing any game dev at all, which was quite painful because my passion is games development at the end of the day. And then I had a bit of a rough time with work and I had to take a bit of time off. So I spent that time off playing with games again, sort of experiencing what other people have done in the time I'd been away and how things have changed. And I realized that in the past, building a game like Legends was something really special. These days, loads of people building games like Legends. So what's the next step? Well, you're going to build something special, so let's build a multiplayer online RPG. So that's where I went.
Oh, that's amazing. And actually that, like you say, 10 years ago, creating a pixel art RPG as an indie developer wasn't a big thing, because indie developers were doing kind of like very linear narrative stories,
Hmm.
or kind of more experimental horror-y sorts of games, which are now a dime a dozen on the Steam page. And actually the fact that you want to do something special, so you kind of went, right, I've got this idea, I'm now going to make it bigger, and I'm going to take this community aspect and I'm going to kind of give the community a platform to converse with each other in game, is brilliant. I mean, I've interacted with a handful of people whilst I've been playing it when I kind of dip in and out. So kind of, was the development of the kind of the online aspects challenging? Because obviously I know that there are Unity plugins like Photon and Bolt and stuff that are kind of useful for creation of kind of like servers and whatnot for this. Did you use one of those, or did you create something bespoke? Kind of, what was that process and how challenging was it?
Okay, so my background and my work is in building, my day job is in building video conferencing solutions. So I'm used to having to build real-time systems pretty regularly. I don't use Unity. I don't use any game engine, actually. I just use the browser APIs because I don't know why, really. I like the creativity. I like the space. I find a lot of engines kind of pigeonhole you and get you into a particular vein of working, and I like to have the room to play. So since I was doing everything on the client side in TypeScript, I decided that everything on the server side should be TypeScript so they could share code, which means the game engine that's running on the server is just a Node.js server with a whole bunch of TypeScript that I wrote. It sort of hangs together pretty well. The process of getting it there was quite painful. I did a lot of prototyping before I started the main project, trying to understand what would and wouldn't work. And I think I found a nice sort of groove where the game feels like a unique game, because no other game really works like it, because it's not using any engines. It feels different. It feels special, which is what I was aiming to get.
Greetings.
That's incredible. And the fact that you've done all that through just basic API scripting and stuff is mind-bogglingly impressive. I'm just sitting there, I'm just like processing how much code you must have had to have written to get all that to work. Is just, that's amazing.
There's a fair bit of it, but it's not as much as you think, actually. There's a lot of time people spend trying to fit in with the engine or trying to understand what the engine's doing. I don't have to do any of that because everything I already know, because I wrote it all. So It makes the process really quick, and it makes it very easy to add bizarre features that nobody's expecting because there's room to do it.
That's brilliant. And that is really cool, because I know that I've spoken to a handful of indie developers through this chatbot thing, and a lot of them have said we use Unity because of X, Y, and Z, or we use Unreal because of this reason. But actually, to talk to someone who's like, no, I just wrote everything completely off my own back is absolutely incredible. Wow, that's blown my mind a little bit. I'm not gonna lie.
It might just be I don't play well with others, but
but then, like you say, to be fair, like I've played around with Unreal and Unity, and they are very much like, you will work in this way. You will either work in Blueprints and C++, or you will work in C#. And you will very much work in the way that we tell you to. And if something doesn't work, then we're not going to run your game because we're telling you something is broken, which is infuriating. But yeah, to have that kind of complete freedom must be just like breath. And like you say, if you want to add bizarre bespoke features, you can just, if you've got the code or you know how to code it, you can just crack on and do it, which is so cool.
Don't get me wrong, I wouldn't recommend it to somebody that hasn't coded plenty before.
Yeah.
But if you have, you might as well.
That's awesome. That is that's so cool. Sorry, I'm proper nerding out over this. It's just like, yeah. We're gonna get back on track, otherwise I'll be here for the next 20 minutes just going, oh my god, mind blown. So how one of the biggest things in RPGs generally, and probably more so, or from my understanding, more so in online multiplayer games, is balancing. And balancing of stats versus, so player character stats versus enemy stats and damage outputs and damage mitigation, all these wonderful things that players take for granted. I push button, I have a shield that reduces damage. How much, or how did you handle that balancing in game? In my mind, I just imagine huge spreadsheets. Because when I worked on stuff, it's big spreadsheets for balancing stuff.
So yeah, when I did Legends, it was all based on a spreadsheet, and it worked, but it became quite obvious Like players are really smart. They notice patterns and they understand patterns. So they kind of start playing, they play for a bit, and then they go, all right, so one health potion is worth 5 gold, is worth 2 goblin ears. Therefore, the way to game the system is to do this. So deliberately with Tales, I've built a system that there's lots of moving pieces and it's a lot of emergent behavior in the way that things can work, so players can find their own route. And to balance that, the only way I could really do that, because I don't really understand everything about how the system is going to work, is the way that the networking system works is it runs a simulation. It runs a simulation up on the server and it runs a simulation on the client. And to be able to do the networking, we essentially just syncing whatever happens on the server with on the client. But that simulation can also be run at 100 times speed, 1,000 times speed on the tooling. So whenever I add things, what's happening is there's a whole bunch of validation rules happening in the background. It's essentially just running loads and loads of scenarios to try and work out what would happen if a player did X, Y, or Z just randomly. And then it looks at the output and looks at the damage done and works out whether suddenly an item that I've just added has made it possible for a player to become super powerful and beat something. If it does, it flags that up and then tells me you don't want to add that item. That's a bad idea. So yeah, the whole thing is self-validating. The tooling just basically every time I add anything is running validation rules and simulations to work out whether that is a safe thing to add or not. It also deals with, we were chatting just before about the economy. It also looks at that, so it understands if I add a new spell that allows you to kill monsters really quickly, how much gold is that going to generate? And if that gold is way higher than the cost of the spell, that's not a great thing either. So it flags that sort of thing as well.
God, that must have been one hell of a piece of AI code you've written there.
Yeah, it's not really AI. It's just it's just running loads and loads of iterations of mimicked players. So I mean, at the start it was very small. It didn't do very much at all. But as time's gone on, I've added more things. I've just grown that at the same time, and I expect it to grow more and more. So it'll become. I'm hoping at one point I won't be able to predict what the game does, but I'll know if it's good or bad.
Oh, that's brilliant, and that's really cool as well. That you've got this system that's just running checks constantly and then popping out and basically flagging to you, no, you don't want to do that. That might break the game a little bit. That might make people too powerful or too rich.
Yeah, I have ended up in one point not being able to add anything, where the game basically said everything I did was wrong, which wasn't great for my ego, but it was good to know that the system was working.
Yeah, that must be one of those moments where you just sit there and go, well, what do you want from me then, code?
That was it. Yeah.
I want to add stuff, but you're telling me I'm not allowed. What do you want? Oh, that's incredible. And just, I'm still at the whole, you've written this entire thing from just API coding. That's just, yeah. I might move past that at some point in the next couple of days, I'm sure. So going back to the kind of gameplay mechanics and stuff, obviously kind of balancing, you've got this incredible system in place. You've got this beautifully crafted narrative, which is really engaging and yet really concise at the same time. The next thing that I want to kind of talk about is the dungeons in the game, because obviously player character wanders around a kind of an overworld in inverted commas, and then enters dungeons. Was the dungeon implementation it's good, this is a two-pronged question. So the first half of it is kind of like, was the dungeon implementation a challenge, and then from that, did you kind of work on lots of different varied dungeons, or was it kind of like, right, this is a kind of like basic blueprint for a dungeon, and I'm just going to like tweak color schemes and maybe move a couple of rooms around?
Right, so that's a big question.
Yeah, I was going to say, we'll start with the first bit. Was the dungeon implementation a challenge?
Okay, so there are 3 types of dungeons in Tales. The first is a handcrafted one, and essentially that is just like the overworld. So the majority of the dungeons that you hit at the moment are just handcrafted areas where I've spent a whole bunch of time mapping them, making them right, and that comes really from my tabletop days of wanting games to be a certain way. The dungeons that you hit at the moment, the implementation isn't any harder than the overworld, but it is, it's a much more complicated thing to design a dungeon than it is to design a field, for instance.
Yeah.
The dungeons have to be balanced differently. There's a second type of dungeon, which are instance dungeons, which you would have seen in other games. Yep. Where when you enter the dungeon, either you or your party get a separate instance of that dungeon. I hadn't planned those right at the start, so they were kind of complicated to add. But once I got to this point of having the game up and running, it was sort of an incremental thing that I could sit and work on. And they work in the game already, so you can there are already dungeons in the game that mean that you have to use party to solve them. So there are dungeons where there are 2 pressure plates, and you have to have 2 people with you to be able to stand on them to open the door, that sort of thing. That's really, really helped with encouraging community. Before that point, most people were playing it like a single player game and then just meeting friends and chatting in the towns. Suddenly, everybody's working together. So I'm going to do a lot more of that. I love the community building aspect. And then the third type of dungeon that I haven't added yet is what Legends used to have, which was completely procedural generated dungeons. I love that idea because it means that it's got never-ending replay value, which is fantastic. Those dungeons will be hitting probably in a couple of months' time. I'll be starting to add those in, and that brings its own challenges. I mean, procedural generation of dungeons in Legends was really simple because everything was just very basic grids. And this one, as you've already seen, it's a lot more complicated in the dungeons, and it needs to be smart. So that'll be a big challenge, but I'm looking forward to that bit, actually.
Oh, that sounds epic as well. Yeah, kind of. And that's what you've described there is you've got 3 really specific, very different types of dungeon that all have very different types of gameplay as well. And, kind of like what I love about this game is that unlike some other MMOs and other kind of like online multiplayer games, it's a very calm and not super intense game. Like I don't have a lot of time. I've got 1,000,001 things to do, like a lot of people do nowadays. And I quite like it because I can just log on for half an hour or so and just have a bit of a wander around and get mauled by large groups of zombies in a crypt because I apparently suck at the game and I'm getting my ass kicked constantly. But it's really nice. But yeah, I mean, like that instance dungeons on top of crafted dungeons and then procedurally generated dungeons. This game is it's gonna have everything. It's like just
the idea,
yeah. It's brilliant. Like you say, like I've got to and I've done one of the instance dungeons, and I was taken aback with just how pleasant the whole community is for the game. Actually, that was what struck me. Like sometimes when you do kind of like you enter instance contents and stuff in other kind of like really big MMOs and stuff, people don't talk or people don't communicate, and the standard here is tank pulls entire room and you're expected to keep up, and it's like, I just wanted to kind of just chill, really. But what I noticed when I did one of the only instance dungeon that I've done, was just how nice the whole community was, and the fact that people were just like, they were chatting in the chat, and it was just nice and calm, and we were just mooching through a dungeon quite nicely. I was like, oh, this is lovely.
You touched on something really important there. The game is very much designed for people like myself I've got a full-time job, I've got young kids, I don't have loads of time to play games, but I want that experience. I loved massively multiplayer online roleplay games in my past. I really enjoyed that experience and that community, but I don't have time to spend 4 hours a night working on them. So yeah, this is really about building a community and a game for that type of player. So that's why the cross-play works. You can play the game across Android, iOS, desktop. It's running on the Switch just about.
Wow.
It's running. One of the players plays it on an Xbox. I'm not even sure how they do that, but they do.
I think it might have been through the Edge browser on the Xbox.
Must be.
Possibly, yeah.
But that's kind of the point, is that everybody's meant to be taking it quite relaxed and having fun rather than trying to be the best all the time. And you're right, the community building around it, they're a fantastic community. They're really positive with each other. I've never seen any online roleplay game where the minute you join, somebody says, "Oh, do you want some help? Can I help you with this?" Yeah.
That's what, the first time I logged in, I was doing the tutorial and someone just put, "Do you know what you're doing?" I was like, "Oh, I've just started playing, but thank you. I'll let you know if I need anything." I was like, "What is this new?" Usually I'm used to logging into an MMO and getting a random, direct message from a gold seller who's just like, boom, go to this website and buy this gold. And it wasn't even that. It was just someone very casually offering help. I was like, oh, gorgeous. absolutely
I
lovely.
feel a bit protective of the community now. I have to say, I don't want it to. As much as I want people to play, and don't get me wrong, anybody watching this, I absolutely want you to play. I want the community to stay that positive environment, you know.
But I think that's part of the game as well. Like one of the things that I noticed when I was playing it is it's genuine credit to you because you've created this beautiful game that's got this wonderful narrative and this beautiful lore and this amazing world building and these great dungeons and really cool kind of like pixel arty vibe to it. It feels very calm. Like, you know, I kind of, without mentioning the name, I play a very big MMO and it's very intense. You know, it's like bam, and big story beats, big dungeons, big epic battles, and all this kind of like stuff. And it's kind of like have to keep going. But I haven't got the time. I don't have the time. Like you say, I don't have the time. I've got jobs, I've got things to do, I've got family and everything else. I don't have the time to spend 4 hours a night playing and grinding and smashing my face against the same content over and over again to make small gains and stuff. And actually, I think credit to you that you've created this game that's got this really calm, almost tranquil vibe to it where players are going and playing it because it is just it's a different experience from what people like. It's especially me for example, I'm used to big epic games that kind of like suck you in and are like you must play hours and hours and it becomes a second job. But this is very calm and everyone kind of approaches it in that kind of just like, this is it's fun, I can communicate with people, I can do fun content, I can do cool battles, but it's just relaxed in a way. Like there is obviously the battles and stuff are really cool and are really exciting and fun, but I can go in, I can play it for half an hour and I don't feel like I'm going to miss out on loads of stuff because I've not spent 20 hours a week grinding content, if you get my meaning.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there are a few players already that will go through the content. I'll release a content update and they'll be done in a day. You know, they'll run it and take everything, but they don't disappear then, which is the really strange bit. Normally, when you've got a content release, people will just disappear afterwards and then come back for the next content release. But I'm finding that they'll play the content, and then they'll hang around so that they can help other people out and chat with people. And you can already see friendships building up, which is, you know, the absolute win when you're building an online game, is to see people making friends over it. That's ideal.
Yeah, absolutely. And like I said, all credit to you because you have created this beautiful game with this really awesome community. And you know, if you're watching this and you're part of that community, please do let us know in the comments. Because I am very much a noob and I do very much need some help. Next question then is kind of, we've touched on some of these already, but kind of whilst you were developing Tales, what have been some of the most challenging parts of the development? I've got an inkling, I already have a feeling on what some of these are going to be, but kind of just what have been some of the biggest challenges you faced while you've been developing this?
Yeah, so I'd say so far the balancing is probably the hardest bit and continues to be. The online play was quite a challenge originally, but it's kind of become a background noise thing now. It's there, it's working. I just kind of build layers on top. Probably the hardest bit is I'll be honest, the indie dev, the hardest bit is marketing. It's social, it's all of that stuff that you don't know you're meant to do. And for an old man like me, when I came back after 10 years to find that everything's completely changed, you know, if you're building an indie game today and you're not talking to streamers, you're not talking to YouTube, you're not talking to these people, then your game isn't going anywhere, because that's how people find out about games now. You know, that is the core thing. So I've started putting all sorts of features into the game for Twitch streamers. I'll also be adding Twitch drops in the next sort of few months as well. So, you know, streamers will get extra bonuses by streaming the game, which is good for them and it's good for me. I think there's a great symbiotic relationship that you can have with streamers as an indie dev now. In terms of other challenges, I think just purely the content. I'll spend a week building content and some of the fastest players will be through in 8 hours. That's disheartening at times, but you know, like I said, they seem to stay around and they're enjoying doing all the extra bits and pieces. So it's good.
Oh, that's brilliant. And yeah, I mean, like you say, touching back on the kind of the challenges of using, you know, YouTube itself. This is one of the reasons why I enjoy this part of the Robot Republic stuff so much because I get to talk to amazing people like you, and hopefully we can get more people looking at and playing these amazing games. So yeah, I mean, from my perspective, it's always a pleasure to have people on. But oh, I'm sorry, I'm still at the fact that this whole thing was just written completely in API code. It's still just mind is blown. Last question then, which is kind of like, you know, I always ask this and I get mixed responses. Some people go, I can't tell you anything because we've signed NDAs, and some people go, boom, big spoiler, big reveal. What is next? What is kind of next for you, and what is next for Tales of Yore? I mean, are you going to continue work? Obviously, I would imagine you're going to keep working on this, but are you going to start working on other projects as well? Or is this going to be just a sole focus? And if so, what is coming next for the game?
Okay, so the game, I actually didn't expect anybody to be playing it until the first year had gone. So I've been developing it 8 months, so it's very early, really. So there's a lot to come. The size of the world that's in there at the moment, based on the current planned world, it's about a 16th of what should be there. So there's a lot of content to come yet. In the near future, we've got crafting is being done at the moment. So you'll be doing all the traditional good crafting things, but again, you'll be doing them in those casual, relaxed ways, not anything too heavy. Excuse me. Player housing. Certain players, I have a patron, so for anybody that's a patron of a certain level can buy a house in town. Everybody else can have a house outside, so you can have your own house. And as part of crafting in houses, you'll be able to create goods and sell them and set up shops. So hopefully the world starts getting filled with player-filled towns and places. And then the next big one after that is mounts. It's already quite the biggest bugbear anybody has that's been playing the game for a long time is it takes a while to walk across the world. It takes too long. So being able to add in interesting mounts and have people sort of sprint across the world, and then of course sailing and shipping. That's the other piece that's coming. So that's in the sort of next 6 months or so. I don't tend to plan much further than that out, but there's plenty to go.
I was going to say that seems like huge amounts of stuff.
Yeah.
To kind of work on over the next few months. But it sounds incredibly exciting, and I, for one, I'm really looking forward to it. I genuinely, like I've already said, I love this because I can just play it for a little bit. I think I was playing it earlier on today, and one of my friends was like, "Oh, what's that?" And I was like, "Oh, it's called Tales of Yore. It's an online multiplayer game, an online multiplayer online RPG," and they were like, "Oh, it looks so beautiful." I was like, "It is. Go and create an account and go and sign up." Because because it's just really nice to play. I was like, and it's not super intense. You can kind of just mooch about and do a dungeon, and it's really chill. And actually, to be fair, they messaged me earlier on and was like, "I've just started playing." I was like, "Yes." But yeah, Kev, thank you so much for coming on the show. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on.
It was really good to talk to you.
Thanks. And do you know what? Honestly, like, we're huge support for this project because it is really exciting and it's really lovely. And if you have yet to go and have a look at either anything to do with Tales of Yore or any of Kev's games over at Coke and Code, Kev, where can people find you, and where is your Patreon? Because obviously the Patreon will go down in the comments, but just to reiterate.
Sure. cokeandcode.com, you'll find all my games from the past. And talesofyore.com is where you'll find the game, and you can play directly there in your browser. The patrons link there, as of all the social accounts that you'd expect. So if there's any press or streamers that want to get involved, then there's specific pages there for them to get assets and resources to use.
Awesome, brilliant. Kev, like I said, it's been an absolute pleasure. And if you have not gone and checked any of Kev's stuff out, the links are in the description down below. Please do go and check out Kev's game. I actually was going through Kev's back catalogue of games, and there are some amazing ones on there, which are on my ever-growing backlog of games to play. And obviously, do go and play Tales of Yore. And like I said earlier on, if you are already playing, please do let us know what your username for your character is in the comments below, and maybe you can help me do some content because I'm still rather sucky and really low level. But yeah, Kev, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thanks a lot, Josh.
No worries. And to everyone that's watching this, big love to everyone, and we will see you next time. Bye, guys.